In this video, we will look at how we can convert wide form of panel data into long form and vice versa. Now, we all know what a panel data is. A panel data is basically consists of time series of all cross-sectional entities or subjects in the data set. So what does this mean? Let us say we have data from 1950 to 2020 of India's GDP. Now it's a time series data because you just have one entity and the data is over a period of time. Now let's say besides GDP, you have also collected data on India's inflation rate. It still remains a time series because you are talking about just one cross-section entity, which is India. But let's say now you have also taken data on UK's GDP from 1950 to 2020 and UK's inflation rate from 1950 to 2020. In this case, it becomes a panel data set because you have a time series of two cross-section entities. One is India and the other is UK. So as soon as you introduce another cross-section entity and you take its data over a period of time, it becomes a panel data set. Now there are two ways of representing a panel database. One is a wide format. Now in case of a wide format, an entity's responses or data is in a single row. That means, let's say we have data on three firms. So the first firm's data for all the years and for all the variables will be in a single row. The second firm's data for all the years and for all the variables will be in a single row, and so on. So this is a wide form because of the width of this data set, because you have enlarged the width. So what you're widening your data set. The other way of representing a panel data is that you have a separate row for each of the years for each of the firm. Okay, so let's say we have data for firm 1 from 2016 to 2018. So this will come in three rows. For every year and for every firm, you have a different row. Similarly, for the second firm and for the third firm. Now, which of these you need to use will depend on the nature of your data set. Now, in some cases, wide format would be preferable. In some cases, the long format would help make your operation easy. Okay. So, since we would be interchangeably using these wide and long format, let us see how we can easily convert wide format to long format and vice versa in Stata. For instance, I have downloaded this data from Center for Monitoring Indian Economy's Progress database. Now it has data on different companies, the city in which their headquarters is there, the state in which the city is there, the pin code of the city, and then we have data on several variables for 3 years: 1987, 1988, and 1989. Okay. So for instance, for 1987, we have data on the company's sales, assets, net cash flow, cash outflow, cash inflow, exports, employees' sales. Till employees is 1987. Then for 1988, we have again sales, assets, the same variables, and for 1989. So this is a wide form of the panel data set. Now, in order to export this into Stata, the first thing even if you have to treat it as a wide data set in Stata, you have to first assign, or you have to first write the time period along with each of the variables which are varying with time. So you have to listen to this very carefully. So those variables which are varying with time, so at the end of those variable names, you have to write down the year or the time period. So since city, state, and pin code the company name. So these are not varying with time. The first time varying variable is sales. So with sales, you need to write down, as I have written here, with sales, you need to write down 1987, with assets 1987, with net cash flow 1987, so on. Similarly for the other variables and for the other years. This is the thing you have to do, and you can do it in Excel before you import your data to Stata. So now let us import this data to Stata. Yes, we want to treat the first variable means. So now you can see you have data on companies, the city, the state input, and the variables and the time varying variables. Okay. Okay. Now, since a panel data has a cross-sectional dimension as well as a time dimension, we also need to introduce an ID variable, a serial number basically for each of these companies. So the way to do that is you write generate ID equal to ID is the variable name. You can give any variable name equal to underscore n. So this will generate an ID for each of the companies. For each of these companies, it has generated an ID. But let's say you want this ID to be the first column or to be the first variable. So you can easily do that. You can write order ID comma first. So in this way, you will get ID as the first. Now, the command to convert this, so it's a wide form of data set, so you want to convert it, let's say, into a long form. So the command to do that is reshape, then you write long, the form in which you want to convert your data to. So we want to convert it into a long form. Now write only the variable names which are time varying. You do not have to write ID here, company name here, city, state here, pin code here. You have to start with the variable names which are time varying. So you have sales, assets, net cash flow, cash outflow, cash inflow, export, and employees. And then the syntax is you have to give a comma and write I followed by the cross section, the variable which helps you identify the cross section entity. So that is ID. And J, you have to give a variable name to the time period. So in this case, let's say it is year. So you have to use I and J. So these are the syntax, but in the bracket, this is something which we have already defined. This is something which a new variable name which we are giving. So now you can see it has converted it into a long form where each company for each year it has a different row. So this is how we convert from wide to long. Now long to wide, again you might have guessed that it would be very easy. So you can write reshape wide, and now it would have converted into a wide form of the data set. Okay. Now we'll discuss another case in which, let's say, the variable names or the time period is not numeric, but let's say it is some string form. For instance, in India, we follow a financial year. So our financial year is 1987 to 1988. So how do we import that into Stata? Okay. So let's say you have data of this form where instead of writing 1987, just you have this. You are writing 1987 to 88, 88 to 89, and so on. Okay. So let us see what happens if we try to copy this into Stata. So I'm using the same Stata window. So it's copied like 1987, 1987, 88, and so on. So you might not like this to be in this format because Stata in the variable names it does not recognize hyphen. It, however, recognizes underscore. So let's say we, instead of doing this, we write an underscore here. So we have to do this for all this. So basically, this case is where the time period is not numeric in nature. So I'll just illustrate it for 1987 because it's the same for other years also. Okay, so let me just copy till here. Okay. Now it is it has taken it as underscore, but this is no longer numeric. So let's say if you try to do this reshape, this reshape long sales assets IIDJ year. So let's say what happens. It says, okay, in this case we haven't generated ID, so let's do that first. Okay. So it says variable year contains all missing values since it is not recognizing that underscore. So because it is no longer numeric, so what you can do is there's a command to do that. You tell Stata that your year contains string variables, so it's like a character. So you can write it like this. Now if you see, you'll have year here, but which has been taken as a string variable. Okay. Now, since we have taken it only for 1 year, so for every year for all the 50 companies, we have 50 years. Okay. But in most cases, you would require your year to be a numeric variable. For instance, if you have to declare it to be a panel data set, so the command to do that is xtset. So write xtset ID and year, so it will give you an error. Okay, because string variable is not allowed in variables. So what you can do is you can destring this variable year, or you can encode it. So you can destring it using the encode command. So you write encode. What do you need to encode? You need to encode year, which is now a string variable, and you have to generate another variable which would have the new values, as you can see that. Now it is a factor or a factor variable coded as blue, which would work in most cases. For instance, if we write xtid now year underscore new, now this now it is treating it to be a panel data, so you can apply your random effects and fixed effects. So this is how we can convert a data in which the time period is given in some other non-numeric format. So this is how we can use it in state. Thank you.